So exams are upon us, and I thought it'd be quite useful if I share a system that I learned in high school that made study much easier for me. It was a memory system I picked up. It's called the link system. It's one of many systems I learned, but it's like the foundation. So this one utilizes a principle where your brain will remember what it sees. So if you can take something and turn it into a visual image and connect that to make a story, your brain will have an easier time remembering it. So to show you how it works, we're going to memorize feudalism in the Middle Ages, which I hope is not something you're already familiar with. Otherwise, you'll use prior knowledge. So we just want an obscure topic and see if you can remember it. First, what are you remembering? Feudal system is basically a hierarchy. So number one in the top position was the Pope. Now he was the absolute boss of the area. Nobody was above him. So everything underneath would answer the person above them. So number two is the king. So he's in second in command, and he would answer the Pope. The Pope would answer to no one. Then underneath the Pope, you've got dukes, barons, and archbishops. Underneath them, you've got soldiers and abbots. Underneath them, you've got followers of soldiers, craftsmen, farmers, and landowners. And dead last is landless peasants. So it's an unusual political system, and we're going to memorize it by turning each of the steps into images. So each layer is going to have an image, and we're going to connect that with the next one. Now, the key thing to remember is when I show you, because I've animated the whole thing, when I show it to you, you need to make one in your mind as well. So when I say, imagine the Pope doing this, don't rely on just looking at it. Create your own custom version of it in your head, and that should work then. And you have to really visualize it. Imagine the novelty, imagine the shock, the feeling, any smells associated, anything like that. All right, so let's get started with memorizing the feudal system. We'll start with the Pope. So imagine the Pope, and he's about to knight the king, and he's really, really nervous. He's thinking, careful, and he's just about to knight the king because he's really worried because his sword is like crazy sharp. So again, you're memorizing see the nervousness, notice how nervous he is. And he goes to knight the king, and oh no, he accidentally cut the whole king's head off. And there's blood gushing off, and the purpose here is we've got the Pope and the king interacting, and that should make the Pope remind you of king. Now, the king's head is rolling along the floor, and it lands on a court by a basketball. And somebody goes and sees it, he picks it up, he jumps, and then he dunks it in the basketball hoop. Now, dunk sounds a bit like duke. So you've got king now reminding you of duke. But it was a hell of a dunk. It was a lot of power, and it crushes through the floor. And it made this big hole, it was really loud, and it went to the place beneath, which was an area of storage. And it lands, coincidentally, in a barrel. So the king's head was dunked, or duke, and it was slammed really hard, crashed to the floor into a barrel. Barrel sounds a bit like baron, and that should connect you to baron. So it's in the barrel, and it made a massive impact, and it rolled around from all of that impact and crashed into the other barrels, forming an arch. So now you've got barrel connecting you to arch. So barrel is now reminding you of arch, and arch is of course for archbishop. But this is not stable. The arch is really quite flimsy. So what happens? It falls, and they all crash through the floor to the basement level. And where do they land? They land in a soldier's quarters. So this should remind you of soldiers. So the arch collapsed and breaks into soldiers' quarters. Now you remembered soldiers. Now it's Canadian soldiers. Why is that? Why Canadian army? That's all that. It's because these are Canadian soldiers, and they speak with Canadian accents. And they see these barrels crash through the roof, and they think, what's all this fuss about? So they have a funny accent, and they, instead of saying about, they say about. Now about sounds a bit like abbot. So now you've got soldiers, and the soldiers are angry and they say, what's this fuss about? And that reminds you of abbot. Now, if you don't get the joke, I'm going to play a South Park clip that kind of made this popular. Here it is.
We don't know what all the fuss is about. The fuss is about taking our citizens. It's about not censoring our art. It's about... What's so goddamn funny?
Nothing. Could you tell us again what your argument is all about?
This is not about diplomacy. This is about dignity. This is about respect. This is about realizing that humor is...
Yeah, so saying a boot is for Abbott, and it's quite funny. But everyone laughs when he says a boot, and that hurts the Canadian soldier's feelings. He gets really, really cross. So the Mountie, he gets mad and he wants to act. So what does he do? He goes and gets his secret weapon. Now, what is his secret weapon? He says, "Craft, soldiers, follow me." Now, the key part is craft and follow. So these are followers of. So somebody's following. And what do you know? It's a craft soldier made of literal craft products. It's craft cheese and all that. So the craft soldier is holding a rake, a farmer's tool. So he said, "Follow me, craft soldiers, follow me." And he's got a farmer's tool. So that means followers of, it's a soldier, so followers of soldiers. It's craft cheese, so followers of craftsmen. And he's holding a rake, which is a farmer's tool. So he's always followers and farmers and landowners. So those connect you with the rest of them. So craft for craftsmen and soldiers. The follow is for followers of, and the rake is farmer's tool. Now here we've got the landless peasants. So you imagine they're all in the streets, and then suddenly that same craft soldier comes along and shoos them away. And that's it. So let's see what you can remember. Here is a blank one. I recommend you can either pause now and write it out, see if you remember it, or you can see if you remember it top of your head, and I'll give you a second pause to go. So think about the first one. What was the first one? It was the Pope. And what was the Pope doing? Well, he was nervous about something. He was nervous about knighting the king. Now, he should have been nervous. He should be nervous, because he ended up cutting the king's head off. And what happened when it fell off? Well, somebody dunked it, which is the Duke, and it went through the floor, didn't it? It was a big dunk, and it landed in something. What was it? It was a barrel for Baron, and it was a massive smack into the barrel, and it rolled on and made an arch, so archbishop. But even the archers, you remember, it was really quite unstable, and it crashed through the floor into what? Oh, into the soldiers' quarters. And what kind of soldiers? Oh, they were Canadian soldiers, and they were mad about what all that fuss was, a boot for Abbott. And people laughed at them because they said something in like a funny accent. So they got their secret weapon and said, "Follow me." Soldier, it was talking about a soldier, so followers of soldiers. And it was craft cheese, so it was craftsmen. And it was holding a farmer's tool, so these are farmers and landowners. And what did this craft soldier do? Well, it shooed away your landless peasants. And that's basically how it works. It takes anything and turns it into a series of stories where you have to connect them together in a notable way. So it has to be something unique. So it has to be a crazy thing. It can't be like the Pope shaking hands with the king. It has to be something you wouldn't expect to see. So for example, nobody's really seen the Pope knighting the king and accidentally cutting his head off, so you put that one down. And that's it. So how can you use this for study? Just take what you need to study. Instead of looking at these huge paragraphs, break it down into key ideas, visualize those key ideas, and have them link to each other. Hence the name of the system is called the link system. Hopefully you'll find it as useful as I did, and best of luck in your exams.